Welcome to the Minister and officials. Kind of find it hard to know in one sense where to start in this. I was at the eye of that storm when it broke on the 26th, 27th of February 2013, and I actually remember having a conversation with your then predecessor, Minister Kathleen Lynch, and I know where I was when she phoned me, and I know that I didn't say very much to her other than to say that I was as sour as I've ever been in my whole life. And the reason for that is this. This programme, as has been mentioned by the Minister, went back to 1979. And would the Minister agree that while we had no language in 1979 around money follows the person or person-centred services, this scheme was the most simple, effective, efficient way of putting some money into some people's pockets that they could use in a variety of ways to make themselves more mobile. They could give their brother money to pay the car, tax and insurance. They could get some hackneys. They could do various things. It was an absolute model of money follows the person and person-centredness. And this was the day when the whole thing, pack of cards, came crumbling down as a result of a decision by the government that it needed to be abolished for, of all things, equality reasons. So look, I was also, I should say, a member of the review group that was set up. And Deputy Mitchell has referred to the issue of the time that has elapsed since. I'm very clear. We were press-ganged to get on with that work and get it done within, if not weeks, a number of months. And that did happen. And the second thing, and interestingly enough, that review group was chaired by a former senior civil servant who had been in the equality side of things, Cilda Langford, a woman with a very strong reputation, and if I'm not mistaken, would have been involved in the development of the legislation in relation to the Equal Status Acts. That group did its work in a number of months and was under pressure to have it ready for the interdepartmental people, and that was, as referred to in your note, Minister, being chaired by the Department of Taoiseach. So, give or take a month or so, in the autumn of 2013, that matter passed to an interdepartmental working group, chaired by the Department of Taoiseach. And we're here still today. And in fairness to your responses to other members, you're not in a position to give us comfort that we won't be here for some time to come. So I have a number of particular questions that I want to put to you. But before I do that, the Deputy Cassell's mentioned current issues around public transport up in the Meath area, and I'm particularly thinking of the 109 route that goes from Cavan, Dublin and back. I know one young woman, 20 years of age, who within the past month, having done all she was required to do, ring them up, give them notice and this, that, the other. This is a really interesting issue for a petitions committee. 3 times in about 10 days, she rings her local, whoever you have to ring. She wanted to go from a town in Cavan down to Bus Áras and back. And there were one after the other, 3 instances when she couldn't do that, even though it's an accessible fleet of buses, even though both ends of the journey, the 2 stations, etc., were accessible. So that young woman is going to 3rd level.
This is the Cavan one.
Yeah.
Right, Cavan, yeah.
And I'm bringing a more general point out of this. This is somebody, to put it in economic terms, the state has, and rightly so, invested in her education. She's been able to go to mainstream school, primary, secondary. She's supported to go to third level, right? Now she's at the stage in her final year, striking out to do interviews, to make pitches to progress her career. And she can't actually, with her hand on her heart, say, I'll be in your office or in your wherever for that meeting or for that interview. So there is a real edge to this. You talked, Minister, about the most needy who are in crisis. And can I say to you, and I don't want to be negative about this, but in sporting terms, I'd regard that as the ambition of a manager that just doesn't want to lose by an awful lot. I don't see it as the most needy, the most in crisis. And you're talking about, and then just a moment ago you mentioned the health need. Like, the issue here, okay, people do have mobility issues about getting to health appointments. You're dead right about that. But my earlier case, there's also, and here's the big win for everybody, the people themselves, their families, and the state. You never tire of telling us, and not just yourself but officials, how much is being spent on disability. The issue is what's the value of the spend? And I think things like transport is a massive connecting issue for people, their education, their training, their employment, their social participation, and the issue raised by others in relation to isolation and the value of people. I'm now coming to my questions, Cathaoirleach, Cormagat. When was the first occasion, verbally and then in writing, that the Department of Health was advised of issues about this scheme by the Ombudsman? Sin on Céad question. Céad Ceist. We're told that there was 4,700 people in the scheme, and that you're doing estimates about how many might be in it now, the new iteration. How many people have not been able to join the scheme under its old, if it had continued as it was? How many people between February 13 and today, shall we say, are in limbo? Like, they are real people. Whether it's 10, 1,000, 300. The point is, there are people who actually are losing out because the hold has been put on the scheme. It's fair to say the people who were in it stayed in it. But the person who would have been applying for it, there were people who had applications in that weren't met at the time. There are people who would have applied since. What's the department's number or estimation of the number of folk who would be in that scheme now if it had continued? The number of new people. I know there would have people exited because of death, no doubt. The other question I have, my third question, is, did the department investigate the options that were within the Equality Act to deal with this? Did the department look at opportunities that the Equality Act would have afforded them to actually deal with this issue? Put another way, could the Department of Health have simply legislated for the scheme, to take it from administrative to legislative? My understanding is that that would have adequately dealt with the issues. My next question: did your department seek any advice from the Ombudsman's office, or did the Ombudsman's office offer any advice as to how the matter might be dealt with, or how you could get further advice on that? Next, this bill has already been on the legislative programme. How long has it already been on the legislative programme before this current session? And I want you to also take note of, if not indeed comment, there were recent changes. This is slightly tangential, but it goes to the heart of the issue about there not being accessible public transport. Recently, changes in bus airing time, you know that people have to give notice, wheelchair users have to give notice. Within the last month or so, I understand that 3 p.m. on a Friday is now the cut-off time for someone who wants to travel Saturday, Sunday or Monday. And that bus airing have extended what was a 24-hour time notice for people to use a Monday to Friday service out to a 48-hour notice period. And in relation to that, there was no public announcement, or there was no announcement to, if you like, public and otherwise through the disability organisations and whatever. That's possibly not a question that you can answer straight up, but it shows how this is related to other things. My final question. I have heard figures about minimum and maximum cost of the new scheme that I'm not going to, it's rumour, so I'm not going to mention them, and you made a useful point in that in relation to negotiations. But the max number, the X euros that you're looking for, that's possibly contested by DEPR, what would that give in terms of numbers of people and scope in terms as a scheme? If you were to get what you were looking for, what would the scheme look like in terms of its criteria and the numbers of people that would be able to avail of it, and particularly the numbers of people with disabilities? Thanks for your tolerance, Cahill.
Minister, well, you have significant experience and history, both kind of previous and current, so I think it was important to give you that time, Minister. There's a lot of questions there.
It sure is, and thank you very much, Senator Joel. And again, I want to, I've worked with Senator Joel in the past, and we've crossed swords as well, but I know that the issues he's pushing are very, very important, and I know I totally commend his work on disabilities and also his work in the Disability Federation of Ireland. In relation to the motorised transport scheme in February 13, that was abolished, and that was the time, as you said yourself, Kathleen Lynch was Minister at the time, and it was a very, very difficult thing. In relation to why didn't that scheme continue on, the government had to respond to the Ombudsman's report. There was concerns raised at the time now in relation to that some of these schemes could have discriminated against people with intellectual disabilities, and I think that's essentially that issue. You mentioned there the whole issue of the young student and accessibility issue. Absolutely, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's unacceptable that kind of situation has to be put on any Irish citizen, and I think that that's something that I would personally raise with the Department of Transport, but also I think in this case with bus airing as well. It's not acceptable, and you mentioned there about the 3 p.m. cut-off time on Friday. I've linked those two questions, Carly, just because they're in the whole area of transport. Just to say two things on that issue, that that issue I'll raise with the Minister for Transport and the Department of Transport, but also with the travel companies as well, because I think it's very, very important. You also mentioned in relation to, you say that we're always jumping up and down about the money we get for disabilities. Well, can I say that I want a hell of a lot more spent on disabilities, and when we announced that figure yesterday, a lot of people, there's a lot of work still to be done. I totally accept that. And the big issue that it raises, if you announce in the region of spending on disability services in the region of 1.763 billion in 2018 estimates, right? It's right that you talk about the value of your spend. It is correct, and the social participation of persons with disability. So I'm just making that point is, part of my job and part of your job is, if you have a budget like that, does it go to the most needy, and does it go to the person with disability? In relation to the question about limbo and the new people, I'm not sure whether I can give an answer in relation to that, but what I'll do is, any of the questions that I can't answer, my department because some of my officials weren't even in the department at the time, but my department, my officials will come back to you with more direct answers. In relation to the Equality Act, could the department have moved? There was huge costs involved there because of the age issue as well. And the other issue was the Ombudsman stated in the published report in 2011 that the Mobility Allowance scheme was incompatible with the Equal Status Acts. And the Ombudsman recommended that the scheme should be revised so as to make it compliant with the Equal Status Acts by removing the upper age limit. This is the age issue again, and use a broader definition of disability in respect of eligibility for both schemes. These recommendations raise significant losses of legal, financial and practical nature, particularly as regards extending the eligibility to a significantly wider cohort. So, but what I'll do is, some of those issues in relation to those, the details, I will come back to Senator Joel on that. The department would be in contact, regular contact with the Ombudsman. That was one of your questions, and I answered the question in relation to the cut-off time for people travelling on public transport. I'm going to raise that Department of Transport and also bus air.
I'm conscious of time, and
yeah.
your